totally unexpected. Both husbands died so unexpectedly. I kept thinking, why is this happening? You know, I went through all the emotions. There's so many emotions people go through when they're grieving.
Yeah. Thank you so much for visiting with me today. Will you introduce yourself?
My name is Cheryl Burton, and I recently moved to Pleasant View, Utah, about 3 years ago. I'm a retired nurse. I retired from Lakeview Hospital, where I worked for 24 years as a nurse on several different units. Really enjoyed my occupation there. I loved being a nurse and was sad when I had to retire.
Mm.
And since I've moved to Pleasant View, I've made a group of friends by going to the senior center and I always jokingly say I'm a retired nurse, but now I'm a new tap dancer, a
Mm.
new talent that I've just started developing at the senior center in North Ogden.
Okay, that's awesome.
And I'm the very proud grandmother of 27 grandchildren. I have 6 children, 2 stepchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about your journey. You've been a widow twice.
Hmm.
So let's start with your first husband. How did you guys meet and how did that story begin?
Okay. My first husband met me when I was living in just outside of Dallas, Texas. I was a nursing student at Texas Women's University at the time, and I was in the junior class, and I was the social class chairman and in charge of putting together a dance that we did every month on weekends. And when I went around putting up posters and inviting different groups of people to the dance, because it was an all-girls school, we went to medical school. We went out to the air base where the Army men were training to be helicopter pilots. And while I was there with a group of my friends, I was invited into a basketball game. And all of a sudden, one young man started tapping me on the shoulder and introduced himself. And he asked me why I was there, and I told him. And he told me he was studying to be a helicopter pilot. And he said, "Can you come talk to my commanding officer? And I would really like to come to your dance. Can you come talk to him and see if he'll give me a pass for next weekend?" I said, "Sure, I can do that." So I did. And then next weekend came, and sure enough, his name was Doug. He showed up with him and his driver, who was his best friend, the only one that had a car, and they were the only two allowed from his unit to come to the dance. They showed up that weekend, and the rest is history. He told me we started dating after that, and he told me that he knew from the minute he saw me
Mm.
across the floor in a gymnasium where the men were playing basketball. He said, "That is the girl that I need to marry, that I am supposed to marry." I found out he was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he'd been a member of the church for generations in his family, where I was a practicing Catholic.
Mm.
My family had been Catholic for generations. I was born in Rochester, New York, and when I was 8 years old, we moved to Texas, and that's how I started studying at Texas Women's University. So, a few months before Doug and I met, I had another man that I was in love with, and he was a Southern Baptist, and he went to Vietnam because that was the time of the draft, and men were being drafted to go to Vietnam. And I was in love with him, but he did not want to marry me before he left because he didn't want to potentially leave me as a widow. So he said, "I want you to date," and I said, "Well, I don't want to." And he said, "Well, just do it anyway. I want you to be happy while I'm gone." So then when Doug and I met, I told him about Don, who was the first man,
Mm-hmm.
and told him what was happening. And I said, "I'm willing to date you, but I want to be above board and everything and tell you that what's going on in my life." And so we dated for a few months, and then Don came home from Vietnam, and I did not tell him in the letters. I never wanted to send somebody a Dear John letter, so I didn't tell him in the letters that I found somebody really special to me that I was dating, because at that time I loved both men. So I decided to date both men and see what happened. What happened, and I prayed really hard about it, and trying to decide, because I truly did love both men. And my parents were hoping that I would marry a Catholic, because that had been everybody in my family had done that for generations. And they were disappointed that the two men that I cared most about were of other religions. So anyway, as I prayed about it, I decided the right person to marry was Doug Eschler from Salt Lake City, Utah. And we talked about raising our children and everything. And our plan was every Sunday we were going to attend both churches, the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church. And we were going to take our children to both places and when they were old enough, they could decide for themselves where they wanted to be baptized into. And that sounded like a reasonable, logical idea for both of us. So we got married and went on a honeymoon to San Francisco. And when we came back a week later, we settled in at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Doug had become a helicopter pilot and a warrant officer, and he was assigned at that base. And our first church meeting together was we went to an LDS servicemen's ward at Fort Bragg. And I'll never forget what happened that day when I went to church. A Samoan man was the counselor in the bishopric, and he was conducting, and it was testimony meeting. And as he bore his testimony, he started crying, and I had never in my life seen a man cry at church before, so it really touched me spiritually. And after the meeting was over, the missionaries came over and introduced themselves to me and Doug, and Doug told them that I'm a non-member. And they immediately, their faces lighted up, and they said, "I can't believe it. You look like you're a Mormon already." I said, "What makes you think that?" And they said, "Well, you have the light of Christ in your eyes. Can we come over and share the gospel with you?" I said, "Absolutely. I want to learn more about it, because since my husband's a member of the Mormon Church, I need to know more." And they were thrilled. So it took them a whole month to give me the discussions for me to decide to be baptized. When I read, my husband told me to read from the New Testament, James 1, verse 4. "If any of you lack wisdom, pray about it." And I prayed really hard, is this the right church to join? And I decided it was. Surprisingly enough, to all my relatives, I never again attended a Catholic church. And even that first Sunday, we only went to the LDS church. And I've been a very active member of the LDS church for over 50 years now. And very happy that my first husband found me and that was my decision.
Yeah. And you guys went on to have 6?
We have 6 children.
Kids?
And when my youngest daughter was born, she was 10 days old, and I was sitting home sewing a blessing dress for her. And Doug was assigned to fly in an air show with another. They had about, I think, 5 men on board that were American servicemen. They were flying Chinooks, and they were going to carry men from all different countries, paratroopers. There were over 45 men that were on board, paratroopers, and they were going to jump out of the helicopter with their parachutes over the air show. And this happened in Heidelberg, Germany. As they were circling, getting ready to jump, a malfunction occurred, and one of the rotor blade fell off, and the front one fell off and broke out, hit the back one, and they lost power and crashed immediately. All they were able to do was to steer away from the crowd, and so when the crash happened, everybody on board was killed, and it was over 50 people. And there were no survivors at all. And while all this was happening, I was sitting at home sewing a blessing dress for my 10-day-old daughter, and had no idea, because I didn't have TV turned on. I didn't know what was happening that day. So when the men came to inform me of Doug's death, they allowed a man in my bishopric, him and his wife came over and broke the news to me. I was Relief Society president at the time of our ward, and the man that told me was a counselor in the bishopric, and his wife was my best friend. And the minute they opened the door, I could see the tears in their eyes. I knew something bad had happened, and they told me that there had been a helicopter crash and everybody was dead, and I was just absolutely horrified, the shock. And then having to tell my children was so hard. They were really young at the time, and how do you tell your young children that they'll never see their father again? And I had a real struggle because I didn't get to say goodbye to them, and had no idea that this was going to happen. Just absolutely none. It wasn't in a war zone or anything. It was just supposed to be a safe air show. So that happened on a Saturday, September 11th, 1982. Coincidentally, also on a 9/11, which every year on 9/11, I feel the sorrow of what happened in the United States along with the sorrow of losing my husband that day. And then when the military men came over to help me, they assigned Doug's best friend, another helicopter pilot, to come and help me go through all the Army paperwork and decide where we were going to move. And that was a hard decision to make because we were in the military, we were going to make it a career, so we didn't have a plan for where we were going to move. We had been in Germany it was only our second year in Germany, and we were going to wait and buy a house after we chose the state that we wanted to live in back in America. And so I prayed and prayed about it again, and I realized that my choices were I could move to Utah and be near my husband's relatives because they always treated me like a daughter. And since I was a member of the Mormon Church, I really wanted to raise my children in an LDS environment. My other choice was I could move to New York and live near my parents, and my parents absolutely loved me and the children and wanted us close by. But I knew that they would always put a doubt in my children about wondering, did I make the right decision in joining the LDS faith? And so as I prayed about it, I felt like the best choice for me and my children was to move to Salt Lake. And when we got here, I started looking at houses immediately. By the way, he died on a Saturday, and I was on a flight. Me and my children were on a flight out the following Thursday to come back. So that was a really quick decision. And my best friends in Germany got together and supervised the movers when they came and packed up all of our earthly belongings. And when we got here, Doug's parents helped put a funeral together, and I felt like I was in a state of shock at that time. I just, in shock of losing my husband, trying really hard to take care of all my children, and I was nursing my youngest daughter, and just trying to, figure out what should I be doing for the rest of my life. But my day-to-day biggest concern was raising the kids and putting them in a safe environment. And as I looked around, I found a beautiful home in Bountiful, Utah, and it was suggested by my in-laws that Bountiful was a great community to raise a family, and we loved Bountiful. It really was a good place to raise children. I moved into the Bountiful 45th Ward at that time and was completely immersed with love from all the people in that ward. They absolutely took me in and befriended me and my children and helped along the way. And I honestly don't know how I could have survived my life without without my faith and without the members of the church, because I didn't know anybody in Utah except Doug's relatives. And so
it's amazing that you would just plop down into a new place and find comfort and support like that to help you through such a difficult time. What else helped you cope through that?
I think as I look back on it, I was really fortunate, I think, to be Relief Society president at the time because of that calling. I knew all the women in my ward, and they all bonded together and came over to visit me and showered me with their love and their concern and kept in touch. At that time, we didn't have cell phones, so we couldn't talk on the phone or anything. We just had to send letters back and forth. And other friends that I had known in the military reached out to me and sent letters of encouragement. And then, of course, my husband's family were really close and very helpful with my children. And my own parents were devastated with the loss, too. They loved my husband dearly, and they were really sad that I chose to move that far away from them. But every year, they always came to visit me, and I went to New York to visit them with my children, and we stayed a month each year. So we got along many years, and the children were raised, and my 3 boys and my oldest daughter all served LDS missions. And things were going along pretty good. I decided to go back to school and become a nurse because when I married Doug, I'd finished 3 years of college toward a 4-year bachelor's degree. And so I decided, as I pursued the idea, I went to Salt Lake Community College, and the military paid for me to go back to college. It was a VA benefit and all my children received their tuition paid for too at schools through the VA. And so then I became a nurse at Lakeview Hospital in Bountiful and really enjoyed that. And while I was working at Lakeview Hospital, I I dated here and there a few times, off and on, but nobody really serious came into my life until my supervisor at the time introduced me to her brother-in-law, her husband's brother. And his wife had just died 3 years before that, before she introduced us. And she said, I don't think you two would be right for each other, but I'll introduce you to him because he's single and he's LDS and he's about your age. Well, when we met on our first date, we found out I'm 2 days older than him, and our 50th birthday was coming up in 2 weeks for both of us. And so we started cross-country skiing together every Saturday and fell in love doing that. And then we got married after about 6 months of dating.
So how old were you at this point?
We just turned 50
Oh, yeah, you
that
just
year.
said that.
Yeah.
And so all of your kids were out of the house?
No, I still had several children at home. Well, my youngest son was on a mission at the time. In fact, we planned our wedding around his mission. He went into the MTC in June. We got married July 10th, 1999. And then he flew to Finland in August of 99. And I told my husband, we've got to work our wedding around there's so much to do getting a missionary out in the field. And so we worked really hard at that. And then I still had 2 daughters left at home. My 2 youngest daughters, and one was in high school and one in just finishing elementary school. And we had 21 really good years together. And Dwayne was he lived in Layton. His first wife had died all of a sudden. It was all of a sudden from an injury, an infection that she developed after a sinus type surgery. And so he always wanted to move to Idaho. And when he retired at age 64 from Hill Air Force Base, he was trying really hard to convince me to move to Idaho, and I said, absolutely not. By then, all my children were married, and they all lived in the Davis County area, and I said, I'm not leaving my children and grandchildren behind. I said, as we looked around, I said, the farthest north you're going to get me is no place farther north than the Pleasant View, North Ogden area. And I came to Pleasant View for the first time ever to go to a funeral of one of my daughters, her husband's grandmother, and fell in love with this beautiful little community. And so as we looked at homes and I prayed about it, where should we move? We found a house that we really both liked. We're really happy with in Pleasant View. And it's perfect. The Pleasant View 9th Ward has again welcomed us very warmly into this community. At that time, Dwayne was still alive. And he was really excited. He felt so much more welcomed than he did in Bountiful. He just felt like these people, all of our neighbors and people in the ward, were truly going to become our friends. And as we settled in, and it took a while to unpack and everything, COVID hit. In 2019 is when it started, that we started feeling the effects of it in our community. And we went to, trying to think of everything exactly how it happened. First, I wanted to mention, backtracking a little bit, one of the reasons I moved to Pleasant View was Dwayne had been inactive for a number of years due to a variety of reasons. And I said to him one day in a conversation, he'd been inactive for about 5 or 6 years, and I said, he really didn't like the Bountiful area. He didn't like he didn't feel comfortable in the ward we were in, etc. I said, would you start going back to church again if we moved to another area? He said, yes, I would. And I told my visiting teachers at the time that story, and they said, well, what is keeping you here in Bountiful? You need to move. And I said, you're right. It was like two angels had given me this idea.
Mm.
Good idea. So then from that point, we started looking, and we were here for a year. We moved into this ward in October of 2019, and everything was going along great until Dwayne contracted COVID in October of 2020. And I got it at the same time. I actually had symptoms 2 days before he did. But mine was more like a cold and with a few aches and pains involved. And he got a lot sicker than me really quickly. After a few days of having the symptoms, he was so sick and his heart started racing. I took him over to the local emergency room, and they decided he needed to be admitted to the hospital. He not only had COVID, but he also had pneumonia on top of it. The hard thing for me as a retired nurse was I wasn't able to visit him at the hospital, because during that time period, one of the things with COVID was they wouldn't let anybody come to visit the hospital, even if you were a relative or anything else. Nobody could visit. And that was so hard, and we kept in touch every day with long phone calls, multiple times a day. And I realized he became a lot sicker than me for many reasons. He had diabetes, and his lungs had been injured years before in an autoclave fire at Hill Air Force Base. And so we were both 71 years old at the time, and our age was I'm sure a factor also in his dying, but he got sicker and sicker in the hospital, and he was there about 3 weeks, and the last 5 days they put him on a ventilator. That was the last time we talked to each other, was the day that he called me and said the doctors want to put him on a ventilator, because they said that's the only way he can breathe. His oxygen saturation was getting lower and lower. And when a person is on a ventilator, they're sedated, so they're not able to talk. They're really not conscious during the whole ordeal. So he was on a ventilator for 5 days, and on the 5th day, the doctor called me, and he said, because I'd been in touch with the doctors and nurses every day during his hospitalization, the doctor says, we have tried everything that was available at that time for treating COVID, we have tried with him. And he said, all of his organs have failed. There's no chance of saving him. He said, what do you want us to do? Because we recommend taking him off the ventilator, and he'll probably pass really quickly. And I said, can I see him at least one last time before he dies? And the doctor said, yes, since you've had COVID and you've recovered from it several weeks ago, we'll let you come in, and we'll put the gown, gloves, and mask on you, and we'll let you come in and hold his hand while we take the ventilator off. So I did that, and I called as I was driving to the hospital. It was at Ogden Regional. It was about a 20-minute drive or 25 minutes, and as I drove over there, I called all the family members on my cell phone and told them what was happening, and went in, and they put me in the gown, glove, and mask, and I stood at the bedside and held his hand, and the respiratory therapist came in and turned off the respirator, and he never consciously came around, but I talked to him and squeezed his hand, and then he passed away very peacefully after only 10 minutes off the ventilator.
Wow.
And it was a real shock for me. I just did not expect him to die from this disease, even though at that time thousands of people were dying throughout the world every day.
Yeah, it was unexpected.
Totally unexpected. Both husbands died so unexpectedly. I kept thinking, why is this happening? I went through all the emotions. There's so many emotions people go through when they're grieving.
Yeah.
And you bounce around from emotion to emotion, and first it's a total shock. Yeah. And I thought, and that was a time in October of 2020 when people were told to, stay home as much as you can, stay away from people. People weren't going to work. People would come to visit me, but they would only stay on the porch, and they would wear a mask and just, stay as far away as possible, and everybody was trying to obey all the rules, and I was on in phone contact with all my friends and family members the whole time, and we had a graveside service for Dwayne several days after he died. And people came, but they kept their distance. And it was a beautiful service in a gorgeous October with all the fall leaves and beautiful weather conditions, and I was surrounded by my family at that time. And then,
Do you feel like because of those different circumstances that made it more challenging to be at a graveside where people are all spread out, and or did you feel their love even though things were a little different?
I definitely felt their love. And it was, the good thing about it was, I think my husband Dwayne would have been really happy with the service that they provided.
Yes.
And because he was in the Navy and he went to Vietnam earlier in his life, they did the gun salute
Oh.
that they do at all military funerals, and I know that would have made him so happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no, I felt very comforted. The hard part was after the funeral and everybody goes back to their own lives,
Yeah.
and I'm at home. At the time, I had a little Shih Tzu who said his name is Ozzy, and he was 17 years old, and he was my only companion at home. My daughter, my middle daughter, came to visit me and stay with me for a few days from Seattle. She lived in Tacoma, Washington with her husband and their 4 children, and so she could only stay a few days and see what she could do to help me out. And my children checked on me constantly, but mostly by phone calls.
Mm.
And I just felt just numb with grief, lonely. Felt like, um, but I always was grateful. Thank goodness I had the gospel in my life.
Mm.
And after a while, one of Dwayne's sisters told me, she said, I feel at peace. It was Dwayne's time to go. And I've always thought that when people die, that it's their time to go. So that gave me a lot of peace. And I could have never survived either one of my husband's deaths without the gospel in my life.
So the day to day, though, you're here alone. It's kind of isolating.
Very isolating.
How did you get through those days?
I talked on the phone to friends. I wrote in my journal. I read scriptures. I started, one of the things that really helped me is I started reading or watching BYU talks in the morning. And that gave me, because I had trouble sleeping, I have insomnia, so I would wake up at between 4 and 5 every morning and couldn't get back to sleep. And so it gave me something to look forward to, something to listen to. And then had a wonderful bishop and stake president who reached out to me on a weekly basis. Several times a week they were in touch with me and said, what can we do, what can we do? And I said, I need a purpose in my life. Since I was a retired nurse, I needed something to do with myself, and they both gave me several options of things I could do to be of service. But at that time, also, they were not letting people volunteer for things if you're over 65, and I was 71. They were trying to protect us from COVID. But then an opportunity opened up that the bishop called me to work in the Ogden Temple, and I serve there now every Saturday. I've done that since August of 2022. And that has really brought me so far. And also I was able to go to the senior center in North Ogden, and I've made a group of many friends there. The biggest group of friends that I have is a group of 20 tap dancers. We're all older women in our 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we tap dance together twice a week. And we've become like sisters. We formed these really good, strong friendships. And then I also have friends in the ward, and then friends from back in Bountiful and other places where I used to live, and that we've kept in contact, and that's really helped a lot. And it's been a lot of prayer, a lot of searching for what to do with my life, and because I needed a purpose, and serving in the temple gave me that purpose, and then being a grandmother and great-grandmother and helping my children out.
So I hear a lot of prayer, that you, throughout all of your life, you turn to prayer to guide
Yes.
you. I love that. I hear people, people reaching out to you, and you finding purpose in with other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's so great that you found those things to really pull you through the hard times. I'm wondering if you can reflect back on both of these and maybe share some, if you can find, I think you can, some blessings through all of this.
I know that, especially that with the passing of my first husband, it made me a stronger person than I ever would have been. Because so many people came up to me and said, "How did you survive having 6 children and they were all so young? How did you keep going?" And I said, "Well, I'm just, I because of having the gospel and having all my friends' support, and I'm a mother who loves my children dearly, and I was determined that no matter what happened in my life, I wanted them to have a good life and a good upbringing, so I did the best I could with that. And I know that Heavenly Father strengthened me because of what I had to endure. And I found out after Dwayne died, as the second time was almost harder than the first time, because I thought, I've already been through this once. Why am I going through it again? But the second time was harder for me because I was retired. I was all alone. I no longer had children living with me. When in February of 2023, my dog that had been my constant companion had to be put to sleep because he became really sick with long-term illness. And the same week that he was put to sleep, my oldest son, Jared, who will be 50 this month, was diagnosed with bone cancer and given a shortened lifespan. They told him he probably has 6 years left to live. And I thought, thank goodness I have the strength and I can be here to support my children and help my daughter-in-law with everything that she's going to go through with a husband that she knows will have a shortened lifespan. I also found great comfort in my patriarchal blessing. For a long time, I kept thinking, it was like the Spirit speaking to me, find your patriarchal blessing, read your patriarchal blessing. And I looked everywhere. Since we had moved, I was still sorting through boxes and everything. We'd only been here a year when Dwayne died. And I kept looking and looking for it. And then I realized one day, I don't know why I didn't think of it earlier, you can go on the internet and find your patriarchal blessing. And so when I read it, there was a part in my blessing that said, you will be aware at some point in your life, your purpose in life. You were chosen for something, a special assignment in the pre-existence. And when the time is right, you will find out what that is. And I know what it is now. It's like a light turned on inside my brain. And I had to reach the depths as low as I could go, because every day after Dwayne died, every single day, I prayed, Heavenly Father, but let me die too. I couldn't see a purpose in life. I didn't want to keep on living, but I wouldn't do anything to end my life myself. I just wanted to be able to get out of this world and rejoin my husbands, and especially my first husband, who I am sealed to for eternity. My second husband is sealed to his first wife, and I always jokingly tell his children they're up there sitting on a cloud, just looking down, smiling at us, and I can't wait, and I'm excited to be rejoined with my first husband, because as I mentioned, we were sealed for eternity. But I found my purpose in reaching the lows that I reached. I have had so many opportunities since I came to this conclusion in January of reaching out to other people who've also lost loved ones, either expectedly through long periods of illness or unexpectedly in short periods of time, like me, with accidents. And I have found so many other widows and widowers, and I've been able to reach out to them and offer them comfort and spend time with them and sharing. It helps to talk to other people that have been through the same, that have suffered the same things. And as I've listened to more and more BYU talks, there's so many thoughts that just jump out at me that saying, to find your purpose in life and then pursue it. And Heavenly Father has sent us here to help other people and to serve others. And I've always known that when you pray for something, usually your needs will be met by another person coming to your aid. Heavenly Father will send somebody to help you. And I know He did. And I've also had an opportunity recently to do missionary work, as one of my best friends that I've met in tap dancing is also a Catholic, and she moved here from California and didn't know anybody. And she's joined our tap dance group and we've become good friends. And I brought her to my ward at church on Easter Sunday, and she enjoyed it. And I feel like I can be a good influence in her life. And my sister-in-law said, "How in the world do you find so many widows and widowers?" And I says, "I don't know. I think Heavenly Father sends them to me because it's amazing how many different people I have found. And I know that I can be an influence for good in their life and help perk them up."
And that's your purpose.
And that's my purpose, besides being a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother.
I love that. Is there anything else you want to share?
Oh, I did forget to mention the blessing that came about when we moved to Pleasant View. Dwayne immediately started going to church. And I'm so grateful that he was going to church for the year before he died.
Yeah.
That gives me a lot of peace and comfort. And I'm grateful that I have a celestial marriage with an eternal companion, and grateful for that opportunity in our life, and for the children and grandchildren I have. I'm also grateful to have my 2 stepchildren who are not active members of our church, but they've brought so much love and joy into my life, and have given me a lot of all of my children and grandchildren. That's where my joy lives in my life, is through them and through all my friends.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.